Hi, everyone. It is 6:01, so I think we should get started. But thank you so much for joining us this evening. Tonight, Alphie and I will be talking to you about the proliferation of fake news that we're dealing with in this COVID-19 era. Just a disclaimer, there is absolutely no way that we could cover all of the fake news that is out there. So consider this like a very introductory session to the fake news that does exist about COVID-19. And we do hope that the information that we provide you with tonight will sort of empower you as you navigate this information landscape that we do live in. Just so that you are better able to identify what is fake news versus what is not, and just make better decisions for yourself and for your family. So this workshop tonight is part of a larger COVID-19 speaker series. This was organized between the library and between one of our math instructors, Kamuela Young. And we thought that it was really important to give the scholars at UH West Oʻahu a platform to share their expertise with the rest of our community. My name is Carina. For those of you that do not know me, I'm one of the librarians at UH West Oʻahu. I work primarily with our education and social sciences divisions, but I do enjoy working with any and all students on a wide variety of issues, which is why you've probably been seeing a lot of me this semester as we've been holding a lot of online workshops. I'll let Alphie introduce himself.
Aloha, everyone. Again, thanks, Carina, for the setting this up. My name again is Alphie Garcia. I'm the Information Resources Liaison or Librarian at UH West Oʻahu, and I'm also primarily the Humanities Liaison, so I handle a lot of the English, early English sections, as well as history and philosophy and some of those classes, and shepherding many of those students during their higher level classes. One of the things that draws me to fake news, obviously I'm a librarian, and I pride myself on finding factual information for our students, and Carina and I have both been having these discussions throughout the years. We incorporate this into our early English classes to hopefully inoculate students as they venture out into the world. Definitely being able to parse and tell the difference between real and fake news is a necessary skill. So thank you all for attending today.
Thank you, Alphie. So as Alphie mentioned, kind of exercising these skills is really important. So we hope that you'll take what you learn here tonight and share it with your friends, share it with your family, just spread the wealth in that regard so that you do help other people build up those skills.
Okay, so the basics of fake news essentially boils down to, well, we should come up with just a basic definition of what fake news is. And that's kind of intentionally misleading information. And that in itself is kind of a broad definition, but it can be propagated through a number of different channels, whether it's intentional or through a state actor, or someone trying to profit from creating just some general information that they can put out into the world. Fake news has been with us for a really long time. It's nothing new, but now in the 21st century, we have to deal with the rise of social media, and it acts as kind of a funneling or amplifying device for spreading this information. Whereas before you might have to rely on credible sources. Now credible sources are up against non-credible sources that are kind of on an equal level playing field within social media, if that makes sense. So what fake news is not is again, it's not a new phenomenon. And basically it's not extensively news that you dislike. I think this is probably information, the fake news by definition of Donald Trump, I think. And I don't want to spend my whole time poo-pooing on President Trump, but you know, he certainly has popularized the term, and he uses it against his enemies or the people he perceives to be his enemies in a way to just basically dismiss them. It's not just about that. And it's not just limited to a single network, right? As you guys noted in the chat, you're getting it not only from normal or social media like Facebook, Twitter, things like that. I noticed not too many of you mentioned Twitter, but Kaike did. You know, Facebook, WeChat, Snapchat, these are things that we're normally seeing them in, but it can also show up in YouTube videos, especially YouTube videos. Anything that's algorithmically generated, or generated in the sense that the news is coming across your face through an algorithm, whether it's through Google or Facebook, it's not just limited to that platform. It can show up in podcasts. We've seen it in the White House press briefings, things like that. So fake news, again, is news that's intentionally false or misleading. And again, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. We can't escape it. So what do we have to do about it? We have to develop skills. We have to develop the keen eye for sensing these things. And I think in this sense, I'm probably preaching to the choir, right? We are in academia, we trust in the truth of things, of scientific evidence, but that's not coming across when we talk to our parents or loved ones who have a differing opinion of what science is, and that's a real challenge. And I don't think Carina and I have a distinct solution, but knowing is half the battle, essentially. So Pope Francis has, even at that level, talked about the effectiveness of fake news to skew messages to seem like it's real, but then it's not quite. It's emulating reality, and again, these ideas have been around for a long time, but now they are used to harness kind of our negative emotions like anxiety, contempt, anger, frustration, and they, again, through social media, amplify it. So rather than bringing us together, fake news, especially as we've seen within these past few years, has really driven us apart. So different types of fake news we can talk about. Hoaxes, so things that are just straight out hoaxes that often are used to sell things. So you might have seen when I go down the rabbit hole of YouTube, you know, someone selling a product to claim that it will cure a certain disease or whatever disease that happens to be prevalent. So these days, of course, we're getting a lot of fake information about coronavirus supposed cures, like, you know, if you drink a little bleach, it'll clean your insides out and you'll be good. And you'll find this not only in showing up on Facebook, but there are like news clips of from your evening news, of news reports delving into some of these fake news. I'm trying to think of the right word, but these claims, right? And I'm thinking, so although this is kind of a blatant example, like the recent drug that was purported to help with stopping the coronavirus that had virtually little to no evidence, hydrochloroquine, I think, the Lyme disease. You guys can chat me if I'm wrong, but it was being pumped and peddled by sources, well-known sources, like, yeah, thanks, Carina, hydrochloroquine, peddled by Fox News after Trump kind of pumped it up, and, you know, come to find out a few weeks later, there's really not a lot of evidence, and so the intention behind some of these may be innocuous, like, you know, people are looking desperately for a cure to something that scares them, and that's a reason why they may put that information out there, even though it's not the best. So this is one example. I've seen also examples of zinc, you know, so common food immunity, supposed immunity boosters. You take enough zinc and you can prevent yourself from getting the disease. Of course, these things can have consequences, right? And the consequence might be or they're creating this fake news as a way to generate clicks, right? So you have Facebook, you have YouTube, and these creators, as they put out this information onto the web, they could, of course, trying to be sell you a product, but they can also be trying to generate clicks. So you have a really outlandish, all capitalized title: new study predicts COVID-19 will kill 65 million people by the end of the year. It's sensational. This is the kind of thing that you would see on a tabloid newsstand, but now instead of, which in the 80s and 90s, what would draw your attention as a little kid looking into those magazines, now we're seeing it throughout social media. You know, you're just scrolling through, or you see your friend or family share it, and there's really, there's no intent or content behind it. It's pretty much just the title, and if you click on it, you go to their site, it generates a little bit of money for them, and that's all they want, right? This is another traditional one that I've seen, but it can appear on both sides. For this particular instance, we're seeing a lot from the right, that COVID-19 is a liberal hoax to hurt the economy and to shut down Trump. I mean, obviously we can start looking down the consequences of some of these claims. You know, New York, San Francisco, some of the hardest cities hit are left-wing bastions, I guess. So the logic of it doesn't really follow, but it's kind of like driving a wedge between the two parties, which is problematic. And it's again, it's a bad type of problem. And then another one is parody and satire, right? So in this one, you know, this is something that you could probably see on The Onion, or other sites that claim that it's parody and satire, or they hide under the guise of being parody. But again, it also falls in line with clickbait, right? You see some outlandish title and you read it and you want to click on it, and you might read a humorous story or hear a story that confirms what you want to believe, and then you've generated clicks. And a lot of these times, unless you know that it's a prominent satire site like The Onion, it's not always easy. There's no satire tag for various reasons, but Facebook doesn't really want to get in the business of policing their content as much as they maybe should, or in some other opinion. But yeah, it's difficult to tell what's parody and satire. Of course, conspiracies are very widespread. We've seen the 5G rollout across many of the larger states, and there's a subsequent kind of belief that the 5G is what's causing COVID-19. Not really. They take some claim like, well, they rolled out 5G in Wuhan, and now there is that's where the virus came from. Not really understanding basic concepts of virology, the spread of disease, how this has happened many other times without any versions of high-speed networks, wireless high-speed networks. So again, and then this has real long-term consequences, or I should say real-life consequences, because many of you have probably seen YouTube videos of people confronting workers installing 5G networks and like setting these devices on fire. This is happening a lot in England, for example. So it's problematic in that sense. And again, straight up disinformation. So early on in the COVID-19 release, and this kind of falls into kind of biased info, but it was an attempt to downplay the extent of the virus. And now what was happening early on is that we didn't know a lot about the virus itself, and we're still learning about how it affects, what the R naught level of infection is, you know. So as more information starts to come out, then you can get a clearer picture of, you know, what the infection rate of COVID is, whether it really is more infectious than common flu. Can we trust the information that's coming from China? And gradually through the months, we've gotten a clearer picture, but there are holdouts that are continually being put out and pumped out into the world, like this claim that COVID-19 is no worse than the common flu, when I think by now it's kind of been shown that in fact it's at least at the very least, it's twice as worse than a really harsh flu year. And we're only a few months into the year, whereas these analytics studying the common flu usually encompass a whole year, so 80,000, 20,000 to 80,000 deaths for the common flu. We're now getting way past that, or we're going to be past the upper limits with COVID right now, and we're only 3 months into the year. So it's just a ridiculous claim, but they're being pumped out because they're trying to limit the extent of, I guess, circles of power. You know, you hear this a lot with the people who are protesting, trying to get out of being stuck at home. And then going back to the misinformation, the hydrochloroquine is a potential cure. And again, this is like, part of it is wish fulfillment. Like, you want it to be true. I think Trump was like, how bad, you know, just try it, just take it. What's the harm? Well, if you take enough zinc, or if you take enough of a certain drug, there are potential side effects, which is why the FDA has ruled against taking this particular drug. So yeah. And then, of course, propaganda. I don't know how many of you saw in early, I think it was January or February, we received a kind of a Facebook or text message claiming that the government was just about ready to lock down everyone into quarantine. I think I didn't see it directly, but it ran across my wife's phone. And so, you know, you look it up, and obviously you understand that the federal government doesn't really have that power. It's really left up to the states. So kind of that threw off my warning bells. But recently, in the last week or two, I think it was found out that that source of information was sent from China as a way to maybe spread propaganda, to sow fear. So actually, I'm reading this example wrong, but foreigners are responsible for the spread of COVID-19. So this is kind of the flip side of that. Basically saying, you know, looking for a fault, whether it's 5G or a particular person or race is responsible for the disease, is problematic. And again, it serves as a device to split us, and rather than join us together. So there are multiple ways that the coronavirus and misinformation can spread. Bots that are kind of propagating information. You can create users. It's been shown, like in these bot farms, you can acquire a number of Facebook accounts, Twitter accounts, and even though Facebook and Twitter shut them down occasionally or very frequently, it's a quick way of kind of spreading the information. So you have all these accounts sharing a similar message or retweeting a similar message. And so what it does is it acts as an amplification. And so it tweaks the algorithm such that that information is then now at the level where it can appear on your social media feed. And so it's a way to kind of game the system, to tweak the algorithm that Google and Facebook have used to make sure that you're seeing the most relevant content, put that in quotes, and just put it out to you. So, and obviously, if you're seeing something with 60,000 likes, maybe you're more inclined to believe it. So it's trying to build a level of authenticity to it. Trolls, again, there's just people out there who love to sow misinformation. It's the 4chan culture, the 8chan culture, where they just, some people just want to see the world burn. And sometimes these people are smart enough to tap into bot networks, and they are able to spread that information. And just they just want to get a rise and a reaction out of you. And while they aren't exclusive, these are a reason why kind of misinformation, especially during this COVID crisis, exists. And then micro-targeting, so promoting fake news to target their specific audience. And this is really easy to do more so than ever before, right? It used to be that, I'm trying to think of an example, in the early 20th century when you had a lot of anti-Jewish tracts, you had to go to a printmaker, you had to print out pamphlets, and you were limited by the size of your ability to hand out pamphlets to people on the street corner or leave them in places that they would be found, and the reach was very limited. But these days, thanks to social media, thanks to the ability to target specific people, specific genders, specific, yeah, people down to the level of granularity you would not believe. You can share a specific message to this population that maybe you've deemed as vulnerable or more receptive to your message. And so that's another way that it can spread, this kind of misinformation. And then of course, tapping into that, just our standard everyday people. We ourselves are giving them the power. We're giving them the oxygen by having our eyeballs glued to the fake news, to our devices, and we're giving it, even if we don't agree with it, it's still making them money, essentially, because you click on it or you make a comment, and that counts as an action or an activity within the Facebook algorithm or Twitter algorithm, and that's making them money. That's engaging people. That's engaging the message. You're giving it oxygen and giving it life.
And just to add on to that, to explain why fake news is larger than real news, it's because people, if you look at the statistics, actually spread fake news more than they do real news. And so that's kind of unknown whether they actually intend to do that. But when you look at the stats, fake news is more widely shared and engaged with than real news is, which is very scary.
And part of the reason for that is because they've been micro-targeted. They have their message specialized to cue on your emotions. And so while a boring news story about COVID might not get shared as much, this story about how Obama created COVID-19 will spread like wildfire, right? So this kind of gives rise to the term called the infodemic. It's kind of, we're just playing on the pandemic. Today, more than ever, we are just in a glut of information. So this is a message from WHO, an overabundance of information, some accurate, some not, make it hard for people to find trustworthy sources and reliable guidance when they need it. And part of it is because these traditional news sources, including WHO and the CDC and what would ordinarily in any other age be trustworthy sources, are now being vilified or attacked for the minor mistakes that they might make. And then now you run into an issue of saying, well, the WHO made a mistake on this part. They didn't share reliable facts, and that means the WHO is just as reliable as realamericanews.xxx or something like that. It's just it's a way of bringing down them credible sources to their level, and so there's no way for the general public, if they didn't know about the topic, to generalize what is real and what is fake. And it's just a huge problem. Unfortunately, this is not the last that we'll see of fake news. It's going to be with us for a long time. This happened, and if we can look at the trend, so previous epidemics, SARS, Ebola, there was a spread of misinformation online. But it's like every time that these fake news generators, fake news actors, bad actors are creating this content, they practice and they perfect, and then they are able to send it out and make it better before, right? So it's almost like they're learning from their mistakes. They're learning how to tweak their own activities so that they can get by filters and things like that, and just share that information. And it's just going to get worse, unfortunately. And what this does in action is it kind of sucks the oxygen, right? The oxygen is being burned through the fake news, and then it sucks the life-giving oxygen away from the credible sources. And more resources are being spent to put out these fires when it could be better spent elsewhere. And that's the reality that we're living in. And it's a huge, huge problem. And it's just going to get worse. Okay, so just kind of go over a few major stories that have popped up. Again, like Carina mentioned, we're not going to talk about all of them. That's kind of impossible. So this was shared by Donald Trump initially as a way to downplay the his own government's recommendations to kind of shut things down, to quarantine in place, and that kind of blew up in his face. But the almost immediately, again, to highlight the numbers that he's sharing, we're already past those numbers. And again, they're using this idea that it's not much worse than the flu to, we can just go outside. We don't need to follow the quarantine. These things happen every day. Did people get diseases? Kind of sidelining the issue of mortality rates among the elderly or people with immune conditions or anything like that. It's a constant fight that people have to shoot against. And again, we're sharing a lot of like right-wing fueled conspiracies, but again, this is from the top, and then it gets kind of filtered down, and it's like everyone reads that playbook, and then they kind of pump it out into the world. So again, these aren't bots. These are actual live people. Candace Owens is a well-known right-wing figure, and they're just pumping it out into the world. And then sometimes they look kind of stupid when in a week or two the numbers change. So they really step in it a lot of times, and then they don't really retract what it is that they've said generally. And that's usually one barometer for telling whether someone is trustworthy or not, whether they're actually able to correct the things that they've said, or willing to at least.
And what's especially scary about what Alphie is saying, that they're not willing to correct themselves, is when you look at like the engagement numbers for like a post like this, you can see 22,000 retweets, 60,000 people liked it, and a lot of people definitely commented on it. And so when you look at how widespread this actual post reached within her network, it's quite staggering to think about all of the people that are engaging with this content and how they're probably spreading it with their networks, and it just kind of catches on like wildfire.
I thought I would go down the rabbit hole on this one. So I was on Google News today, and I was like, you know how they'll give you a list of suggestions of things based on your filter, your algorithms, and then I saw, okay, well, they've got my video game habit down. Well, they know I like to watch the Trevor Noah show and the New York Times I'm subscribed to. And then I have one right below that called Valuetainment. Former AIDS scientist exposes Dr. Fauci's medical corruption. And that immediately caught my mind because I'm wondering, what is this in my newsfeed? I don't subscribe to Valuetainment. I'm not even sure what that is. So we can go to the next slide. I can see here that, okay, well, the video, I didn't actually link to it, but this group is called Valuetainment, and they present this PhD person. So Judy Mikovits, PhD, she's having a sit-down chat with the host of this show, and talking about her fallout with Dr. Fauci, who is now one of the most trustworthy figures in the Trump administration for sharing COVID information, credible COVID information. And again, I'm not this isn't a frequent site that I visit. I've never visited this site before, but the fact that it showed up in my newsfeed, I think I found troubling. So I just wanted to do a little test to see, okay, well, who is this person? So one of my favorite things to do is to go to Snopes, just plug in a name that I saw that seems, it's raised a red flag. I don't know who Valuetainment was. And then I see, okay, well, the question posed to Snopes was, the scientist jailed after discovering a deadly virus delivered through vaccines. This is a report in 2018. And it says that she did not discover a deadly virus. So and then reading through this article and then doing subsequent research, okay, I can tell that this person was actually kind of a disgraced scientist who's now running the circles, the kind of conspiracy theories. She was I'm not sure if she was arrested or she was held for a few days because she had taken her scientific notes home and fired by this company. But now she's running into these anti-vax circles, which is really problematic, right? And this isn't mentioned anywhere in the 2-hour-long video that kind of delves into her spiraling about Dr. Fauci and her issues with the federal government, the non-Trump federal government. But again, just to kind of highlight, if you see something that seems like it raises some red flags, just do a little bit of extra research. I don't know, some could claim that Snopes is a little biased, but I find that they're pretty credible. And if they make a mistake, they will write retractions and things like that. But their entire site exists to counter fake news. So it's a kind of a good tool to run your issues against. So I was able to quickly tell, okay, well, this person probably not an authoritative person. And of course, I don't really want to watch a 2-hour-long video, which is often how these conspiracy theories are couched. Like, you have to really invest your time, and it's almost like length of video is a sign to some people that it's more authoritative or credible. This is another one. So this one you can really transplant a few different names, right? So we've got Bill Gates, the Antichrist. Kind of the idea behind it is, you know, like who really created the COVID-19 pandemic? And Bill Gates gave a talk, a TED talk in 2010, I believe, and where he talked about population control through the means of inoculation. And that's not framing it right. That's actually their framing. So he made some statements off the cuff, talking about, you know, if we give women the right to control their bodies for giving them access to birth control, if we limit deaths by allowing people to vaccinate themselves, there's less issues in third world countries where they can now focus on themselves and better their lives in that sense. So he's in this video, they're claiming, oh, Bill Gates said we can destroy the population by 2 billion people just by inoculating people. So they're misrepresenting what he said by claiming that you know, he's using vaccines to actually kill people, when they're completely misconstruing what he's saying. And it's just, again, if we look at the analytics, which Carina has shared, you know, you see these videos. This particular one, I think, had 2 million shares, or around 2 million shares. Like, that's a lot of money for the creators of this content, and the likes to dislikes ratio is like 12,000 to 2,000. So people are engaging with it, and they're appreciating it and sharing it, and it's just a complete fabrication, right?
Thanks, Alfie.
Sure.
So the next two scenarios, I'll go over. The first one being a tweet that started circulating recently, and Donald Trump back in 2009, blaming Obama for his handling of the H1N1 crisis, and kind of just like mocking him, kind of saying that he thought that Obama should be taking responsibility because you're entirely to blame as president. I mean, you can see that it was a liberal account that was actually doing this. This was widely circulated. It was completely falsified. And so when people were actually looking through the archives of Donald Trump's tweets, they couldn't find it, which is one big red flag that it is not real. But also the second thing that kind of further solidified the fact that it was fake was that Twitter had a maximum character of 140 at the time that this was allegedly made. And so this, of course, as you can see, is more than 140 characters. And so that's just further proof that it didn't exist. But as you can see, people were engaging with the content. You can see that 4,000 people liked this and probably thought that it was true. And on Twitter itself, even more people. What's especially ironic about that is that there is no shortage of actual tweets that people could be using to sort of exemplify the same, I guess, theme or content. And so this is a tweet that Trump actually did make, and this was just a few weeks ago. But again, people are making fake things up, even though they could be choosing to use real things. And so it just goes to show the length to which people like to kind of sow this type of misinformation. And then the last example that we have for you is something that Alphie had mentioned quite a bit. And this was something that was getting a lot of coverage last week when Trump had his press conference and made those comments about disinfectants being a potential solution for the pandemic. And these were things that actually came out of his mouth. They were words that were captured on video. People were in the audience and present when he made those remarks. And what's scary is that people were still refuting it. So it was widely reported, as I'm sure everybody here saw the news coverage, they saw the videos with their own eyes, they listened to him. Later, Trump and his administration tried to allege that it was a sarcastic rebuttal to a sarcastic question that someone had posed. And what's scary in this particular scenario is that we have someone that should be using his platform to spread legitimate information, because there are a lot of scared people out there that want strong leadership, that want real news, that want real facts. And so even if it was something that was in his mind sarcastic, to be sarcastic in this setting using his platform is entirely inappropriate. But just to show some of the defense that people were making for Trump, this is a tweet that was widely engaged with, saying that this BBC headline, for instance, was a complete lie. Donald Trump never suggested injecting disinfectant. He just asked a question. So people sort of like skewing the facts, trying to reframe it to fit their agenda, and kind of just stirring the pot even further, even though we all saw the video and heard the words come out of his mouth. People are still trying to reframe it so that it fits their agenda. And so we are going to highlight two methods that you can use to evaluate content. We'll really quickly go through these. In the past, library professionals would use something called the CRAP test to verify whether a site or a resource was legitimate. The CRAP test itself is more of a checklist style approach to evaluating content. And it has become apparent in recent years that that checklist style approach will not work for something as versatile and dynamic as the internet. And so these two methods actually are not checklist style approaches. They actually require people to kind of sit down and think about what they're looking at and do a little bit of investigation. And so Alphie is going to talk about the first one, which is How to Spot Fake News, which was published by the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. And then I'll be really quickly highlighting the sift method.
Okay, so the first step for spotting how to spot fake news is kind of, again, this is very similar to the CRAP test. You'll probably recognize a lot of these steps, but the first one being consider the source, right? Make sure that you don't just read the headline and check to see that the site actually goes somewhere, whether it's not just the headline and there's actually content. And then within the content, you're looking at the author who created it, and then the actual URL. That can be a hint. There's only so many URL endings out there, and if it's ending in like realusapolitics.fun or something like that, that's a sign that that's not a credible source of information. A lot of times they like to cloak it in a .co domain ending, which is a Colombian domain ending, but people might be confusing it for a company. Make sure, again, read behind the headlines, understand that the whole concept of fake news propagation, or one of the major concepts is getting you emotionally invested, whether, and like Pope Francis said, it's usually negative investment, anger, jealousy, things like that. These are what generates the click and generates the reaction rather than reading beyond the headline. Check the author. What is the author? Who is the author? What's their credibility? Can you, in the sense where I went on YouTube and I saw that link and then I said, well, that seems odd that someone is writing something contrary to Dr. Fauci. Wonder what there is about this person on the web. So you can just plug it into the web, look at a credible source, verify that, okay, this person is probably a disgraced scientist, so maybe I shouldn't trust what this person is saying. Check to see that the person is real. Do they have supporting sources? So can you, I'm trying to remember my favorite Christopher Hitchens quote, or Carl Sagan, but basically it boils down to, what can be given without evidence. Evidence can be dismissed without evidence. If they don't provide the source, where they're getting their information from, and that source is not credible, you can basically dismiss it. And then check the date. A lot of times these old stories get regurgitated, and you don't bother to fact check by going back in time to look to see what the actual source of the news came from. And again, so in Carina's example of the old Trump tweet, right, you have something from 2010 or beyond criticizing Obama. It sounds real. You look at the date, it looks real because it's old, but then you don't actually go back into Twitter or into the archive of Twitter to see whether he actually wrote it. That's problematic. And then try to determine whether it's sarcasm. A lot of times these sites will have an outlandish title. You go to the link, and then you go to the about page of the link, and lo and behold, they're kind of covering it under the guise of sarcasm. But your auntie, uncle, and sister have already shared it to the world, and then they're out there propagating the news source. And what you might have noticed from all of these is that it takes time to do, and that's problematic, right? It can take. It took me 5 to 10 minutes to debunk the PhD professor who was criticizing Dr. Fauci, and so it's just be aware that at least while you're able to determine that it's fake, you still spent a lot of time debunking it, and so I don't know, it's a huge problem. And then be aware that everyone has our own biases. Obviously, my bias being a waspy liberal, a New York Times reading liberal, I definitely can get kind of harsh to people on the right. But I try to be aware of it. I try to be a librarian and rise above it and check my sources. But I definitely have that bias, and everyone has their own biases. We're all human beings, and you just have to, if you're trying to find factual information, you need to check your biases at the door, at least be aware that they're there.
Thanks, Alphie. So that was a 7-step approach to sort of like evaluating the content that you're seeing. The sift method is a 4-step process, and you'll notice that there is a lot of overlap with the method that Alphie had used. But sift stands for stop. So don't engage with the content, just stop immediately. Investigate the source, find trusted coverage, and then trace it back to the original. So try to find some context for the story. So in starting with the first criteria, just stop. Do you know the website that you're looking at? Is it something that you have read a lot? Do you believe that this site is legitimate and trustworthy? If you have not engaged with it previously, or if you're not sure whether it provides you with well-balanced news, definitely explore the site and whether it is trustworthy. So one way of doing that is by investigating the source. And so take a look at the expertise and agenda of the source. Every site should have an about page. If it doesn't, that's a big red flag. A lot of the sites should have Wikipedia pages. And so you can go to the URL, you can get rid of kind of the fluff and just go to the core of the URL, the home page, add Wikipedia to the end of it, and it should push the Wikipedia entry for that website to the top of the list. And a lot of them will say right off the bat, whether it's a satirical news site or a site that peddles like fake news. So that's one way of investigating the source. You can also take a look at fact-checking sites like Snopes, which Alphie had mentioned earlier. And then you can just do a general Google search to see what other sources are saying about the site that you're looking at. And if that doesn't give you a good idea of the site, then you should probably just cut your losses and move on to something that is a little bit more easier to validate. The third step is to find trusted coverage. So if you're trying to verify that a claim is factual because it seems outlandish, look for other reports on it. If you do a quick Google search and you're seeing everything on the first page from sources like CNN and Fox News and BBC, all sort of having the same headline, the same preview, then that's a good indicator that it is actual facts and it is like good reporting. And then the last criteria is to trace the context back to the original format. And so we'll see this a lot with stories, photos, videos. Photos might be framed or cropped to cut out certain aspects that might provide more context to change your mind about what it is that you're seeing. Same with videos. You might be seeing a video of people fighting, but you don't know what happened before to instigate the fight. And so try to trace whatever it is that you're looking at back to the original. If a news story, for instance, cites a research study, check to see if there's a link to that study. If there isn't, try to find it on the web, because news reporters are not scientific researchers, and so they do their best to try to relay the results of the research, but they might get it wrong. And so you'll definitely want to double check to make sure that the claims that they're making in their news story actually match up with what the researcher was trying to convey. And so that's a quick 4-step method, in addition to Alphie's 7-step method. We have some links here, some tools for evaluation, so fact-checking sites, factcheck.org, PolitiFact, Snopes, these are all legitimate and they do a good job of trying to put out the fires as much as they can. Keep in mind that there is so much fake news out there that they can't extinguish each story, but they do try to address the big ones. And then there are browser plugins that you can download. If you are interested in that, you can explore this later. And then there are specific tools related to COVID-19. And so you'll see some of those fact-checking sites have specific pages for COVID-19. There are UH West Oʻahu resources that you can always consult for the most up-to-date information about what our campus is doing and what is closed or what is open, as well as a library guide that kind of points you to resources specific to Hawaii. Mental health, how you can contribute if you're trying to help out with the community or if you need help, in addition to research about COVID-19 itself. And then of course, always try to consult with professional organizations. And so these are the ones that you should be looking at if you are looking for legitimate sources. And so when we're thinking about lessening the impact of COVID-19 on us and on our families, there are a couple of things you can do. First and foremost, always do your homework. So get into the habit of regularly evaluating what you're seeing on social media or on the World Wide Web. Once you start exercising those muscles by either going through the 7 steps that Alphie had highlighted or the 4 that I do, it'll become kind of like second nature. The second would be to share with care. So don't ever share anything that you don't verify as legitimate. You don't want to be part of the problem. So if you are sharing or engaging with content, make sure that it is legitimate. Don't interact with fake news stories. So as Alphie had mentioned, the algorithm will come into play and it will try to perpetuate additional fake news stories to you from the sites that you interact with. So as much as possible, try not to interact with those fake news stories. And then educate your network. So educate your friends, your family, but do so in a very appropriate manner. You don't want to blast them on their Facebook page or on their Twitter page. Call them up or send them a private email and just be empathetic. Don't be accusatory, but let them know that you're concerned and that you're trying to convey factual knowledge so that you're healthy, they're healthy, everyone's in a good frame of mind. It's important that we do our best to not only develop our media literacy skills, but also share that mana'o with our network. So make sure if you have kids that you are instilling those skills at a young age. If you have older parents, make sure that you're helping them because it can be really difficult for people that weren't born in the digital age. They're already at a disadvantage. So help them hone those skills. And it's important to remember that we are living in a really uncertain period. I don't think many of us have dealt with something of this scale before. And so it is natural for us to seek security to compensate for that lack of control that we have over the situation that we're all dealing with. It's important that we not downplay risks. And so we saw this a lot when people, for example, were saying, I'm 20 years old, I'm not in danger of catching this virus, and so I'm gonna go to spring break and enjoy myself. It's very important that you not focus on only the favorable information that's out there, but that you also take a look at the bigger picture and the bigger risks that you are exposed to. Stand in solidarity with each other. As Alphie had mentioned earlier, this perpetuation of fake news is meant to divide us. So it's important that we remain one. We're all humans. The fake news that we're seeing now are intensifying bias and are intensifying just anger and confusion. One thing that's really important to note is that there's absolutely no reason to blame any one racial group for the spread of the virus. And we're seeing a lot of xenophobia and racism nowadays. And so if you do see that, call it out. It's not appropriate to do that. It's not appropriate to make anybody feel less than or to feel like they're responsible for anything that they were not responsible for. And then last, keep in mind that this is a very new situation. It's evolving constantly, as Alphie had mentioned with those statistics. And so what we heard when the virus was first making its rounds in December and January is completely different from what we're hearing now. That's natural as more scientific research is done, but it can be overwhelming to keep up with all of the developments. So just be aware that it is evolving and try not to find it too overwhelming. And so kind of concluding our time together tonight, it is important that we adapt to this new normal that we're living in. And it is first and foremost good to acknowledge that mistakes do happen. And so this was something that my husband brought up. He, every morning, will scroll through his Apple News, and he was flabbergasted. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, this article that I'm looking at from Women's Health magazine about whether it's safe to order takeout is saying that once you, the takeout is delivered to you, that you should unpack it and then wash your hands for 20 minutes with soap and water to get any bacteria off of you. And I was like, Travis, that's ridiculous. The best laugh that I've had probably all week. I was like, there's no way that anyone would wash their hands for 20 minutes. Imagine how much water you'd be wasting. Your hands would be raw. And lo and behold, I was like, it's 20 seconds, it's just a typo. I went to my computer, I looked up the article on their website, and it had been corrected on the website. I'm not sure if it was corrected on Apple News, I think it might have been, but mistakes do happen. It's important to kind of understand that there's so much information out there that things do slip through the cracks like that, and it's bound to happen, and avoid generalizations. And so branding women's health as fake news because of that mistake would be completely silly, because we all do make mistakes. If women's health were regularly doing things like that, then I might be like, they're really inaccurate in their copy editing. Maybe they aren't a source that I want to read or view often because of that. And so when we do hear politicians kind of just throwing out, CNN is fake news, New York Times is failing fake news, it is ridiculous to kind of brand an entire network as fake news because of one honest mistake that they might have made. So do avoid generalizations like that too. It is nice to help others. And so if you are crafty, if you do have experience with making videos or with website design, do your best to spread the word. And so this was a cute video that I found by a very young woman. And so I was very pleased to see that she was engaging with her peers in kind of putting the kibosh on some fake news that had been spreading through TikTok, which is very popular with younger people. And I do hope that more young people, and I guess everybody, will do the same and will use their voice and their platform to help others and to stop the spread of fake news, or try to. It's important that we monitor how companies respond. You want to support businesses that are supporting you and the greater good. So investigate what businesses are doing. Are there airlines that are refunding you completely because you can't travel anymore, same for hotels. If they aren't as ethical or they aren't as willing to work with you, keep that in mind when everything kind of quiets down and when the economy reopens. Put your money where your heart is and with the businesses that are trying to help us. With tech giants, definitely investigate what steps they're taking to protect you and protect their networks. A lot of the tech giants like Facebook and Google and Twitter are trying to ramp up their efforts to stem the spread of disinformation and misinformation. But if they aren't doing enough, keep that in mind and evaluate whether it's important for you to have that account or if you'd prefer to disassociate yourself with that platform because they are part of a larger problem and are not doing their part to take care of it. And then be an informed voter. This is incredibly important to acknowledge that your vote has power. Whether you believe it or not, it does. And so it is important for us to make really informed decisions that will shape our country and our communities for years to come. And so research the candidates that are on your ballot. Take a look at what they said about COVID-19, if they said anything. Were they dispelling it as a hoax? If so, I'm not going to vote for them because they're rejecting scientific claims. They're rejecting scientific facts. And so if they're doing that, what else are they going to reject or try to play off as fake news? Take a look at what they think about healthcare. Do they think that we all deserve healthcare? Or do they believe that the privatization of healthcare is kind of like the method and the route to go? Do you care about profit or do you care about like public good? So make sure that you're as informed as you can be when you're voting for people, because it really does make a difference. That is all we have for you. Are there any last minute questions before we send you on your way? Thank you so much for being a diligent audience.